Hey folks, Alan Saunders, joined by Nick Farabaugh once again for another episode of Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live. We're talking about the Steelers and their prospects in the 2021 NFL Draft every weekday in the month of April leading up to the draft at the end of the month. And of course, you can find all of our written coverage about these prospects at SteelersNow.com. So make sure to check that out. And Nick, today we're going to talk about centers. I think specifically the ones that could go towards the top of the draft, because I think both you and I agree that is one of the top needs for the Steelers following the retirement of Marquise Pouncey. They do have J.C. Hassenauer and B.J. Finney on the roster that can play that position, but it seems like center is a big need for the team and one they're more likely than not to address in the early going. Would you agree with that? And what are some of the prospects they could take on maybe the first 2 days of the draft?
Yeah, so I totally agree. I think they're going to take one very early. They also added Joe Haig, who's a guy that could play all five spots. He's more of, I guess, probably the third or second center, depending on how you view him. I don't think Hassenauer is going to make the roster, so you kind of view him as that. But, someone that they could take early, obviously there's Creed Humphrey. I think that's probably the name most Steelers fans are probably drawn to, just because he was phenomenal at the Senior Bowl. He's been great on tape at Oklahoma for past 3 years. The leader of that room, cerebral, athletic, one of the most athletic centers to actually ever test legitimately at that Oklahoma Pro Day, excuse me. There's also Landon Dickerson, obviously, from Alabama. Didn't get the test because he's been the thing with Dickerson is obviously the injuries, right? The 4 out of 5 seasons he's had a season-ending injury, 2 to his knee and 2 to his ankles. So not good from there, but his tape is a legitimately first-round caliber tape. There's Quinn Miners out of Wisconsin Whitewater, the D3 prospect who played a lot of center at the Senior Bowl. Looked really good against even top prospects at the Senior Bowl. He really solidified his draft stock as probably a top 75 pick. Definitely could be a guy in round 2. There's Josh Myers out of Ohio State, who's a solid guy, maybe not as super athletic, but he's sturdy and steady. Again, probably he's essentially a poor man's Creed Humphrey in a lot of ways. And there's a few other guys that could slip in there in round 3, maybe not for the Steelers. Drew Dahlman out of Stanford's, I think, another one. Kendrick Green out of Illinois. Both those guys are zone guys, not super strong, more your athletic guys that get out in space. But those are probably your guys on day 2, unless you're thinking of drafting a tackle or something and moving him to center like that, which I guess is always possible. You never know, because Dylan Radden's played there a little bit the Senior Bowl. Alicia Vera Tucker's mentioned before, he's repped that at USC in practice, which that would be a first-round pick if they did that. So I mean, there's always possibilities. Rashawn Slater, if he falls, can play center as well. He probably won't, but it's a possibility. So you never know on that end. But just pure centers, those are the guys.
Are any of those guys a player that you think they should be considering at number 24? Are any of these guys first-round picks?
I think Creed Humphrey has a strong chance to go in the back end of round 1 after how he tested, after how solid his tape is, just overall how good he was. Pretty good at the Senior Bowl as well. You just kind of look at the center needs in this year's draft. You have the Chiefs there at 31, and at the beginning of the second round, there's a lot of teams that could use centers. So maybe a team trades up into the bottom of the first round to get that 5th-year option on him, something like that. Creed Humphrey is just by far and away, in my opinion, the most sure center prospect. Again, I think Dickerson's the best one on tape, but the 4 injuries are going to really, I think, stalk teams a little bit and make them wind back on Dickerson. But Humphrey definitely could be in that first round discussion. I think he's in the discussion at 24, even though they weren't at his pro day. I think Cincinnati line coach Chris Morgan was there, so they do have interest in Creed Humphrey. Obviously would deviate from the normal path, but I don't think it's completely out of the question. And we talked about this again, a potential trade back scenario. I think he's also a strong candidate in that.
Yeah, not at a Colbert Tomlin Pro Day, but a junior, a redshirt junior coming out. So a younger guy. A lot of offensive linemen are 5th-year guys, and so that's something the Steelers like. But 6'5", 320, pretty big guy for a center. I mean, is that something that's changed? I mean, that's usually a position where you kind of slotted all the undersized linemen in the past. Is that something overall you see changing, or is he just kind of an outlier here?
I think he's just kind of an outlier, especially how he tested. I mean, this was a guy that tested through the roof, right? I mean, he did just about everything at Oklahoma Pro Day, and I think he came down. I think he's weighed in at like 302. I think at Pro Day, so he's a little lighter than that. So maybe that's something that changed. But you kind of just look at some of these tests that he had. I mean, 33-inch vertical, like 171 10-yard split, 449 short shuttle. Like these are elite times for centers and really linemen in general. And plus you kind of look at what he has above the neck and how great he is at seeing blitz schemes and just taking on power moves from nose tackles or stunting linebackers or three techs or whatever. And he's phenomenal at it. So, even if he does play 320, I mean, he's a guy that moves really well. It doesn't really matter. He can play guard too, if that's what a team needs him to do. So, it just gives Creed Humphrey a little bit more flexibility to kick out to the guard in a pinch if needed as well.
Yeah, and I think the versatility option is interesting because the Steelers have needs beyond just center. Obviously, on the offensive line, they need tackles, they need guards. So you mentioned a guy like Robert Hainsey from Notre Dame, obviously a local kid as well, who's played a bunch of different positions. Is someone like that, someone that might be really an attractive option for the Steelers?
I think he would be. First of all, he's a Tomlin and Colbert guy. They were at his pro day, and so is, I believe, Adrian Clems. So definitely could be someone of interest there. He's played all 5 spots. He's played tackle, guard, and center. They signed Joe Haig to be that guy, but I think Hainsey could be another guy that's maybe do it all, fill him in. I think Hainsey, obviously coming from that Notre Dame line, has great pedigree, has great experience, is polished, coming from one of the best O-line coaches and staffs in the NCAA. So I think the Steelers love that Notre Dame rich tradition. I mean, Tomlin literally said he wanted another Notre Dame guy. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Hainsey was that guy because of his versatility and kind of what he does. I think Hainsey, honestly, when you look at his game, sometimes he's very methodical when pulling at times, and I don't think he's as quick off the edge to play tackle consistently. I almost feel like his best fit is at center. So I think that is definitely a really interesting option for them. He could be a center first and then be your kind of option to kick him wherever you need him. And then you can have BJ Finney maybe slot in if you need to move Hainsey around formation.
And Hainsey's a guy that's probably going to be there on day 3, you think?
Yeah, he would be a round 4 guy, I think, with one of those round 4 picks. Now that would be an interesting thing if the Steelers waited to round 4 to address center, which I guess is always possible. If there's a run on centers before they get up at 55, I think that could definitely be a fallback plan. So I think Hainsey would be interesting, and it wouldn't surprise me if you see, one of these round 4 picks that they have this year be a starter. It really wouldn't be. They have enough holes for where they could legitimately have 4 starters right out of this rookie class.
Yeah, and it's, it seems like interior offensive line is one of those places where you can get players that can step in right away later in the draft. We saw that last season with Kevin Dotson being a 4th-round rookie out of Louisiana Lafayette, of all places, to come in and play right away. And this is a team with a lot of needs, right? We've talked about a lot of different positions already. So, I mean, even though we think Creed Humphrey is a good value for pick 24, does it make more sense for Steelers to address some of those positions where maybe you're not going to get a starter in the 4th round? Like, you're definitely not going to get a starting tackle in the 4th round or a starting cornerback in the 4th round. Does it make more sense to address one of those positions earlier and leave center for later?
It could, although I will say you can't underestimate how key that cerebral nature is of the center position. If you don't have a smart center, and this might be what hits Hainsey a little bit hard because he is not a guy that's played so much center that you can trust him, just to point out blitz schemes and all this stuff from the center position. Like, how strong of a communicator is he? And this is also like the issue with maybe a Miners, someone, that's he's really only played center at the Senior Bowl, and he showed off enough to where you would trust him in that role. But, these two guys are kind of in that same boat where, well, maybe they aren't ready to recognize fronts and blitz schemes and all this stuff. So it depends. I think it could be possible, but I do think the Steelers want as good of a center as they can. I think that's priority no one on the O line for them. Because listen, I think straight up, I think they like Zach Banner and Chuks for better than most of the public does. I very much believe that. I think definitely if you're looking at corner, if you're looking at this is the same argument for running back, right? You could find a better running back in round 4. So why not address corner, OT, or something like that, linebacker, maybe edge even at round 3, somewhere around there. You could, but I mean, it's not a great center class, so I think they should address it on day 2. I think they'll find better value. I think they'll find better players. They'll be more comfortable with who's going to be, snapping the ball to Big Ben this season.
One guy that you can't say lacks experience is Pitt center Jimmy Morrissey. Played more games than just about anybody in this draft class. Is he an option for the Steelers if they don't go center early? And just what do you make of Jim's prospects in general? It was a late add to the Senior Bowl, and I thought it's pretty impressive down there given the circumstances.
Listen, Morrissey's actually pretty solid because, again, this is a guy that on tape not only has the center versatility, but the guard versatility, right? He's flipped over there a little bit for Pitt during the season, played a lot of guard at that Senior Bowl game. He's a guy where you kind of look at what he does, and I've talked about that above the neck stuff and kind of the cerebral nature of it. Morrissey's a known leader, a very good communicator, very smart guy. You just look at what Morrissey has. He's not a bad athlete by any means, so he's not going to be debilitating from that area. Now, he might not put a ton of guys in the dirt, but you don't need to have those pancakes. He's a sturdy presence there. I think Jimmy Morrissey has the ability to be one of those day 3 guys that does play more early on than you would expect and be a steal for a team. And that's not just Pitt bias coming through. Jimmy Morrissey is legitimately a pretty solid center prospect, I think. Definitely within the top 10, probably a top 7 center prospect in this class.
He did a 1.68 10-yard split in his 40, which is really, really fast. That would have been the fastest offensive line 10-yard split from the combine last year. I think Tristan Wirfs was a 1.69 and a tackle, not a center. So I think his athleticism is underrated, and his experience is pretty impressive. I mean, considering we're talking about, Landon Dickerson's been hurt a lot. Some of these other guys didn't play center, and there's projections. If you're talking about guys in this draft that have played a whole lot of center and have done it at a reasonably high level, he's got to be up there. Any other kind of day 3 type prospects you want to talk about? We mentioned Josh Myers from Ohio State. I know Michael Manette from Penn State's out there. Trey Hill from Georgia. Anybody else on your radar?
Yeah, Trey Hill from Georgia is an interesting one because I think this is a guy that, again, the Steelers were at his pro day, including, Mike Tomlin watching him a lot. He said that he's talked to the Steelers a lot. I think Trey Hill is a guy where you look, he's more power than athleticism, which makes me a little bit wary because, again, you don't need to be an elite athlete at the center position. Because I think the most important thing about being a center is being an excellent communicator and being able to recognize those blitz schemes, and just be sturdy. But he's like debilitatingly bad at sometimes at being an athlete, moving up to the second level. Because as a center, if you can't move in space and get up to the second level to those linebackers, which you are tasked to do often, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. So I think Hill's probably more of a guard actually in the NFL because of that, because he can just work in a phone booth, hit bodies, and run over guys, right? So that's kind of his thing. Now you kind of look around the rest of at least the draft class. I mentioned Dahlman and Kendrick Green earlier. If they fall, I think they might go into late day 2 possibly, but Green and Dahlman, if the Steelers want one of those athletic guys and want to go to more of a zone scheme, I think they're beautiful fits for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think those 2 guys are guys that kind of have flown under the radar a little bit in this class, and they really shouldn't have. I think they're pretty good players. So you look at those guys, they're more of your athletic type. Another guy that you could throw in there, we haven't talked about him, Drake Jackson out of Kentucky. He's a guy that could could be a pick there, I think, in the round 4 area. David Moore out of Grambling did a little bit of center work at the Senior Bowl. I don't know if a team would view him as a center, but I think he's a possibility there as well. So, it's not a great center class. As I mentioned earlier, there's not like a ton of centers throughout this draft, but I think there's enough talent, at least round 4 and earlier, where if the Steelers don't come out of this draft with their starting center, it's a failure. So there's enough talent here to get a good starting center. There's at least there's 6 or 7 potential decent centers in this class, at least.
And I think the important thing to talk about is it's not just whether or not, we think this player is an eventual center, but not just that, but also like an improvement on the current roster. I mean, Finney didn't play for an awful Cincinnati Bengals offensive line last year. I have a hard time thinking he's going to be a big difference maker. Was not super impressed with what Hassenauer did in limited reps last year. So, I mean, it does not take a first-round pick to be an upgrade on what the Steelers have at center right now.
I mean, I know there was a story, I think it was last year, that Dotson was learning center. I don't know, maybe that's the emergency option. If the draft just goes completely off the rails and every center is gone by 55, and by every center, I mean Miners, Humphrey, Dickerson, they're all gone, all 4 of them, which I guess is possible. And, the Steelers don't like Dahlman or Green or anyone else to fill in. Maybe that's where they go and they draft a guard early. I don't know. I think that's a possibility. Maybe you move Dotson as an emergency center option. Now, I don't think that's the plan right now. That's an emergency bank option, but I guess that's what they could do. But there's no way they can't come out of this draft with a center. It's just there are multiple players that are better than Finney, than Hassenauer, and certainly if your starting center option in an emergency is Finney or Haig, because again, Haig can play there. It's not going to end well for your O-line. It's just not. You can't have that big of a hole there.
Yeah, I think Finney's a fine fill-in, but wow, I did a lot of F's there. I don't think he can be the plan from day one, and I don't think he will be. I agree with you. I think the Steelers are certainly going to address this position, but at least before the end of the 4th round. And to me, if you get somebody before the end of the 4th round, they move into the starting role sort of by default there at center. All right. Anything else in the middle of the O-line before we wrap things up here on a Friday?
There's not a ton more. Again, this center class, it's not very deep. So if you ain't getting one before round 4, I mean, I don't know what you're doing. Maybe you have to sign one at that point. I don't even know. I don't even think the center market on the free agency side looks very good. So my comments would be top. I would expect a center. I'm almost penciling in center at 55 at this point. I think it makes too much sense. They need a top 4 guy. They've shown interest in all the top 4 guys. I think it makes a little too much sense to go with one of Miners, Myers, Humphrey, or Dickerson there at that spot. Or in a trade back scenario, obviously, Humphrey or Dickerson.
Sounds good. We'll keep an eye on the centers as well as all the rest of the positions. And again, if you have something specific you want Nick and I to touch on, leave a comment. We'll get to it in a future episode. We'll be back next week. I don't know, maybe we'll stay with the offensive line. We haven't talked guards and tackles yet, so maybe we'll do that next. So maybe if there's a specific other lineman you want to hear about, I know tackle has been a significant point of interest for the fan base. So maybe we'll get to that on Monday. So make sure to check out all the rest of our content at SteelersNow.com and all the other shows here on the Pittsburgh Sports Live channel. We're talking lots of football in lots of places. So make sure you click subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and you'll find out every time we've got a new show coming. I know Mike Osti and Mike Vikovkin on Mic'd Up in the Mornings have been talking draft a little bit as well. So check that out. And of course, we've got all kinds of other great Pittsburgh sports content here. So for Nick Farabaugh, I'm Alan Saunders. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time on Draft Talk on Pittsburgh Sports Live.